Good evening and welcome to the Center for Global Affairs at NYU School of Professional Studies. You, our old and our new friends, have heard me say many times that our mission is to prepare global citizens through our graduate program in global affairs, our non-credit offerings and certificate programs, and special initiatives. Last but not least, our public events, such as tonight's, which provide opportunities for candid discussions with policymakers the world over. Thanks to Professor Alon Ben-Meir, we have hosted many distinguished ambassadors from the Middle East and from elsewhere. But the large audience tonight speaks to the genuine interest in Egypt and in hearing from His Excellency Ambassador Mohamed Tawfik, who's the ambassador of the Arab Republic of Egypt to the United States. We're honored. Mohamed Tawfik, a career diplomat since 1983, was designated by President Mohamed Morsi Egypt's first ambassador to the United States of America and accredited after the January 2011 revolution. He has had a stellar career. He was Egypt's ambassador to Lebanon, Australia, non-resident ambassador to New Zealand, Western Samoa, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and the Marshall Islands. Educated at Cairo University with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, he also holds a master's degree in International Organizations Law from the University of Paris and a diploma in diplomatic relations from the International Institute for Public Administration in Paris. He has obviously attended and participated in numerous bilateral, regional, and multinational negotiations and meetings in the fields of disarmament, human rights, labor, and trade. His multilateral positions have included President of the Conference on Disarmament, Chairman of the Group of Seven in Geneva, and Coordinator of the New Agenda Coalition for Nuclear Disarmament. In conversation with His Excellency is our own Alon Ben-Meir, faculty member, senior fellow, intractable seeker of peace in the Middle East, tireless in promoting Arab-Israeli dialogues, be it through teaching courses, writing weekly columns and books, speaking out in the media, and shuttling back and forth between New York, Washington, D.C., and Middle East capitals. I have known him as a colleague for almost 20 years, 19 actually. The first course that he taught was called The Rise of Islamic Fundamentalism, and that was in 1995. Ethnic Conflicts, also in 1995, was the second course. And all that without a magic crystal ball. That tells you more than words about his capacity to foresee and identify problems which are with us today. And in terms of issues which are still with us today, just a small reminder that tomorrow I have Jim Hogue in conversation with Ambassador Hill, who has written called Outpost, Life on the Front Lines of American Diplomacy. At this point, please join me in welcoming His Excellency, Ambassador Tawfik.
and Syria. Did you anticipate that in Egypt, this is something of this nature, of this magnitude, is going to rise because of the spring and what's happening in Syria? What is this how do you see that?
I think that we have noticed for some time now that the problem is not the Arab Spring, that it's not the aspirations of people to have a better life, which is absolutely human, absolutely normal. The problem is when you have situations, political and security vacuum. When you have that kind of situations, then basically anyone with the strength, anyone who is vicious enough will take control. And this is what we're seeing in parts of Syria, in parts of Iraq, but also in Libya, also in parts of Yemen. So this is something that has to do more with the failure of systems than with the strength of these extremist organizations.
But then again, when we look at it, many people, observers, are saying that the root causes, in fact, is the despondency, the poverty, the despair of the population. And when they have no choice, they are seeking extremism because that is the only outlet they can choose, and there's no other choices for them. Don't you think this attributes to the rise of ISIS and rise of other extremists in the region, throughout the region?
Well, I think this is part of the story, definitely. Obviously, these people get a job. Most of them didn't have a job. And these people get salaries. They get steady salaries. But I think there's more to it than that. Because you have a very large number of foreign fighters. You have people who came from the United States and went all the way there. You have people who came from Western Europe, went over the way. So it's partially attributed definitely to this social economic failures in some of these countries. But also the ideology is something that's very important and we cannot ignore. This ideology that says you can have this graphic violence, you can have this rape, this, return to a lot of the basic instincts. And at the same time, you can feel good about yourself because you are doing the work of God. This sort of package is not the first time in history that we see it. We've seen it many times before in history, in which religion is interlinked with violence and creates really terrible results. This is also part of the problem that we're facing. And all these things are intricately woven together. And to be able to confront ISIS, we have to deal with all of these things together.
This is true, but I also always go back to root causes, so to speak, other than economic difficulties, problem, education, lack of healthcare. I will go back to Syria. I've been maintaining all along that our inability or unwillingness, that is the United States, to interfere early. I have said that myself, many others have said it. There was a vacuum created in Syria, and then the Islamists from various parts, including the West, have been able to converge into Syria. That is, we have known something about the ISIS before, but the opportunity for them was created in Syria. That's one. The second one is in the wake of the Iraq War. That is the fact that you have now Sunnis killing Shiite and Shiite killing Sunnis. And so the conversion of all of these events have created now what we are witnessing. Where do we go from here?
First of all, you ended with Iraq. Let's go with Iraq. First of all, in Iraq, the only effective way of dealing with Iraq is to have a national government that's truly representative of all Iraqis. Without that, ISIS will always find fertile ground. People who will welcome ISIS like them, but because they like them, they hate them less than other alternatives.
But do you realize that if you have a representative of all the people, it's going to just change the dynamics? We're going back 8 years now. Sunnis and Shia, since the rise of Maliki, going back more than 8 years. He has done nothing but consolidate the Shiite power in Iraq and basically neglecting, abusing the Sunni, so to speak, minority, albeit 25% of the Iraqi population. What makes you think at this point that the national representative government is going to mitigate 8-9 years of intense hatred, intense violence, and intense animosity between the two sides?
We need to work. This is where we need to cooperate. This is where Egypt, the United States, other countries in the region, we need to work together. This is the challenge. I believe that there's a possibility of dealing with this challenge. It's, in fact, the only way to beat ISIS. So we have to work on that. From our part.
Which way would you defeat ISIS? Lack of significant ground troops coming from the various countries who are affected, but will be affected by it, including Egypt. Is Egypt considering, for example, sending any kind of ground troops to deal with, to help the coalition with ISIS?
I mean, if you look at the military situation, you will find that on the one hand, the anti-ISIS troops are in the hundreds of thousands, and the ISIS troops are in the tens of thousands. The anti-ISIS troops are much better equipped than ISIS, in addition to having the coalition's air power to support them. So the issue really is not to get more boots on the ground. The issue is to make the boots on the ground who are there willing to fight.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, initially, what we saw, when the Iraqi troops basically run away. They left their weapons, they left their boots, for that matter, and run away from ISIS. And now you're saying, when you say 100,000, 200,000 Iraqis, but nevertheless, including the American areas, the coalition areas, ISIS is still making significant gains. Yes, they were stopped perhaps from taking over the Kurdish city of Kobani. They're still making progress here and there, and there is no end in sight as far as we can see.
I think I don't like to exaggerate the power of ISIS operating in a vacuum. Whenever they meet serious resistance, they have not really won any major battles. They have expanded because they move very fast. They have expanded because the forces in front of them seem to disappear when they arrive. Their brutality has helped, of course. People are scared of them. But in the end, they are not a formidable fighting force. They are there because of the security and political vacuum. And once you address the security and political vacuum, it will be easy to push them back.
Yeah, but when you say winning, I don't think this is going to have in any form a conventional type of war. They are not going to fight like two armies facing each other. This is a different kind of fight. This is a different kind of battles. They are in smaller penetrate. They're living within the civilian communities, many villages, Sunni villages, and they're pretty much using what Hamas has been doing, is using human beings, children, men, women as human shields. And this is what you have. Now, how are we going to overcome that? Because the Iraqis so far, they have demonstrated much of ineptitude rather than anything else. The President Obama trying to train some 5,000, 10,000 rebels, Syrian rebels, that is not going to be matched for ISIS. And I don't think there's that kind of concerted effort. Where are the Saudi troops? Where are the Jordanian troops? Where are the troops where are the Turks? The Turks, as a matter of fact, are helping ISIS indirectly than confronting them. So for this reason, I think this is to be an ongoing, long, unless the Arab state in particular come together and say, well, we are not going to take it sitting down, we're going to have to do something about it. And I feel, of course, for me, Egypt is the leader. What kind of role of leadership Egypt is taking at this point to try to change the dynamics?
There is no doubt that, your first point, that in the defeat of ISIS. I mean, ISIS is something new in the sense that for the first time, a terrorist organization is to control ground and rule territory. That's what's new about it. And the first state ability to do that, and therefore it will have to resort to more guerrilla-like warfare. But again, it's these kinds of confrontations are long-term. It's more important and more effective to make sure that the political situation is conducive to confronting them, and that the Iraqi side is prepared to deal with it. And this is where Egypt's value added comes in. Egypt is the let's say the first nation state in history. So when you're talking about Egypt, you're talking about a nation state. State based on race, based on religion, based on ethnicity. It's a nation state. This is the message that people get when Egypt is there, when Egypt succeeds. The other area where we can help in healing the rift between Sunnis and Shia in Iraq, because that's part of.
You think that?
I think we can do the best we can. We can try. We have to try.
My understanding, I mean, right now, in trying to get this government together under Abadi, and I've been talking to a number of Iraqi officials, and they are saying, the truth of the matter is that Iraq is on the verge of basically disintegrated, and unless the Sunnis, Iraqi Sunnis feel that they have to hold on to at the end of the day, let's say ISIS is defeated, they are not prepared, the Sunnis in Iraq, to go just back to the way it used to be, because there is intense distrust and hatred between the Sunnis, Iraqi Sunnis, and the Shiite Sunnis. So is there any, from your perspective, do you feel there's any opportunity, any means by which to persuade the Sunnis that when everything's said and done, they're going to have some sort of autonomy of their own along the line of the Kurdish autonomy in the north? Do you think is this something being discussed now in order to really have that kind of coalition, Iraqi coalition, that can work together, provided the Sunni can see a future?
There is no doubt that you're perfectly right. What we need is for the Sunnis to see themselves within a unified Iraq. And this is basically what we are exploring. This is what is happening right now and has been happening for the past few weeks and will be happening in the next few weeks. So this is an important avenue. We need to do that. In addition to that, there's a lot of troops in Iraq that need to be rehabilitated. They need to be reinvigorated in a way that allows them to confront ISIS. It won't happen overnight, but eventually it will happen.
So you're feeling, just last point on this, you're feeling that it's going to take from the perspective of the manpower, the military necessary, and the time span that is going to take more or less to get to the point where you say ISIS becomes no longer significant power to be reckoned with.
Well, it's very difficult to put a time span. However, the situation is complicated. It's complicated because ISIS operates in two countries, and it's going to be further complicated because ISIS is starting to create networks with other terrorist organizations elsewhere in the region. And it is very possible that when ISIS is under attack in Syria and Iraq, it may move to other countries in the region. So all these things are possibilities, and we have to take them into account. And what we need is really to confront this ideology. We need to confront the ideology. We need to confront the socio-economic failures that is causing young people to be completely desperate. And also need to explain to people that this has nothing to do with Islamic religion.
Well, you touch on changing ideology, and you're talking about not another sort of ideal like or communism. This is a religion. And we're talking about religious ideology. It's going to be extra. In fact, I don't know of any religious group per se that is going to change their mind so readily because of the circumstances. So the Muslim Brotherhood will not change their mind in Egypt. It's not going to change their mind. So this is not something that can be. So in the final analysis, they're going to have to be subjugated. They're going to be basically defeated. And I don't think you can change their mind short of the actual defeat. Now, but however, since we solved the problem, I want to move to another simple, easy subject, and that's Iran. You know, as we speak, there's ongoing negotiation still between the United States and the main and Iran about nuclear weapons. And I don't need to tell you how complicated this is, and Iran influence in the region, and Iran's hands is in Syria, is in Iraq, is in Lebanon. Iran has been the instigator, and now, of course, is seeking to acquire nuclear weapons. Where do you think this is going to go? Do you feel that the United States, the 5-6 powers that are dealing with Iran, are going to succeed to really convince Iran to give up its nuclear weapon program?
Well, I think...
What's going to take?
Well, I think, you rightly point two separate issues regarding Iran. One of them is the nuclear program, and the other is its regional behavior and regional alliance. Both of these are issues that need to be dealt with. As far as Egypt's concerned, we believe that there is no place for nuclear weapons in the whole region. We don't want to see, and wherever there are nuclear weapons, we want to get rid of them. And this is based on our assessment that nuclear weapons will arms race in the region rather than security for anyone. This is our position. This is what we believe in. This is what we've been working for.
But then, as a matter of fact, a nuclear weapon, the possession of nuclear weapons by a number of countries, for example, during the Soviet American era, it has created a sort of tolerance. So neither were willing to attack each other because they would be, mutual destruction. Same thing happened with India and Pakistan. Once they acquired both nuclear weapons, they stopped fighting each other. They fought 3 wars, and ever since they declared that they have weapons, nothing happened. So actually, our experience suggests that if you do have a nuclear weapon, you probably won a war because to be subjected to annihilation. So don't you think that Iran, for its own good reason, wanting to become the region hegemon, it has to deal with Pakistan on the other side. It has concern over Afghanistan. Certainly concern about Israel would be, nuclear arsenals. Why wouldn't Iran continue in order at least to neutralize, to say the least, Israeli nuclear power?
Well, I think the example you have set is very precise. You have a situation in which either you have a nuclear arms race, which is what we saw between the Soviet Union and the United States, or the Soviet Union and the West, or what we're seeing between India and Pakistan. Or you have a situation in which you don't have nuclear weapons. You don't have any, there's nothing in between. And we see that the problems, the challenges that are facing us in the region are people jobs, are people not getting education, people not getting health. If we're going to put all the resources in the region into a nuclear arms race, then really we're asking for trouble. And when we're talking about the Soviet Union, the United States, basically you had stable that provide the basic needs of their populations. But if you have states providing the basic needs of the populations with nuclear weapons, you have an extremely dangerous situation. So our choice is to have no nuclear weapons in the region.
I accept that, except what we have in Iran, based on reports we've seen from the IEA, Israeli intelligence, the American intelligence suggests very strongly that Iran has and continue to pursue a nuclear weapon program. And now the negotiations are going on. What would you like to see in this agreement reached by the end of third week of November? That is the deadline. What sort of an agreement would you like to see as Egypt? What kind of an agreement would you like to see struck between the six powers and Iran?
We would like an agreement that ensures that Iran does not pursue a nuclear program, a nuclear weapon program, while at the same time allowing Iran its legitimate use of peaceful nuclear power.
This is true, but what is going to take? Iran, for example, as of now, refuses to dismantle any significant number of its centrifuges, refuses to close the Arak, the plutonium enrichment plant, refuses monitors to go to Fordo plants. So what you have now, you have a country, they talk the talk, they express willingness to negotiate, but they still, this is why the negotiations are stuck today. There is really little progress. And I think Obama, perhaps out of desperation, would like to reach some kind of an agreement with Iran. That will be the biggest thing he will be able to achieve. So this whole thing is not, it doesn't look good, and Iran is not prepared to take the kind of necessary in order to convince the international community, specifically Israel, the United States, that in fact it is not seeking nuclear weapon program.
Well, I really cannot, I don't have an insight into the actual negotiations. I certainly don't have an insight in what Iranian negotiators have in the back of their minds. I do know that negotiations are ongoing, and we have to wait and see in the end when everybody has to put their cards on the table. I really cannot predict what that will be, but definitely if you have a good deal that will allow Iran's nuclear energy peacefully and allow everyone in the world to be content that there's no weaponization I think we have a good situation. But then we go back to the other part, which we should never forget, which is Iran's behavior in the region, area of concern, as you mentioned.
Exactly, and imagine with Iran equipped with the nuclear weapons, that is going to be significant problems for every single Arab state, and the Gulf states, certainly Jordan, not to speak of, including Egypt for that matter. I just want one more question about what characterize the bilateral relations between Egypt and Iran today.
Well, we do not have diplomatic relations with Iran. We do have interest sections in both countries, and we do have a dialogue. We are able to talk with them, but we have not reached a stage in which we have active diplomatic relations.
What are the contentions in the main?
There have been historic issues, of course. There have been historic differences between the two countries. Right now, if I were to summarize them, I'd go back to the same 2 points. Iran's behavior in the region and the need to ascertain that there's no military nuclear program.
Well, that too being resolved now. Just recently, Egypt invited again Israel and Hamas to come and try to negotiate a more lasting ceasefire. And I think next week or two they will attend, and Egypt has played a very significant role, and I'm sure will continue to play that very important role, try to calm the atmosphere between these two players. What do you expect to take place? What sort of an agreement do you think is going to be able to achieve, being that actually Egypt is more supportive of the Israeli position than Hamas's position?
Well, what sort of an agreement? First of all, we have a situation in which military confrontation will lead to casualties on both sides, but no significant gains. So basically, it's counterintuitive to continue kind of conflict. So you have a good basis for a long-term ceasefire. In the past, the problem with the long-term ceasefire was that it's really very difficult in Gaza to get their legitimate needs through the Israeli crossings. And this feeling of being surrounded and this feeling of not being able to get food, not being able to get medicine, not being able to get building materials for legitimate buildings, this issue was a very big deal.
But then even since he came to, he's doing exactly what the Israelis have been doing. Also close the border. He's not allowing Gaza to cross freely. No real significant building materials is coming from Egypt either. So we have a problem there. This is not just Israel, it's also Egypt. Hence, there's a very strong interest in trying to create a situation in Gaza that is going to serve its interest as well. So what kind of situation? That is, if you were to have, say, a longer ceasefire, well, ceasefire before it had been broken, and then 3 took place between Israel and Hamas. What makes you or me or anyone else think that another ceasefire is going to last unless we really change the real dynamics between the two sides in a very significant way?
Well, I was going to come to this point a little bit later. But first, the point I was at was that you need to have a system in which goods enter to Gaza freely. This is very important because it's happening. Then you have something that is a start in Gaza. And then you have people who have interests in peace without having an economy in Gaza, which is what's happening now. People don't have an interest in stability. People have an interest in trying to break through this embargo.
But then again, the Hamas, with all the hundreds of millions of dollars, been busy building tunnels instead of schools and clinics. And don't you think Israel has a legitimate right to say, okay, if you want us to live in part or in full the blockade, we would like to see Gaza at a minimum demilitarized. Don't you think? And I think I pretty much agree with that premise. Don't you think that's a legitimate requirement on the part of Israel and Egypt, for that matter, to allow to lift the blockade, albeit in stages, let's say 3, 4, 5 years, that Gaza must be demilitarized in order not to have this scenario being played again and again between the two countries, between Hamas and Israel.
This is the point I was coming to, actually. The new element that we have now that is different from what we had in the past, that we have a Palestinian national government has been formed, and that is, at least in theory, in charge of Gaza. So a legitimate, acceptable party that can take control of the Palestinian side of the crossings, whether into Israel or Rafah into Egypt, was the issue of contention in the past. So now you have a new opportunity. The challenges still remain, but you have a new work diplomatically. And this is what we've been doing. If you've noticed, I'm sure you've noticed, basically you have the meetings are alternating between Palestinian meetings, between the different Palestinian factions, and Israeli-Palestinian meetings. And as progress happens in one, then progress happens in the other. So this is basically what we're working towards. But the point I want to make is that a long-term ceasefire in Gaza is not our final goal. Our final goal is a long-term, comprehensive solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
But is it possible? That is, I recently wrote a piece in this connection suggesting, for example, to rebuild Gaza, that that should be also directed toward the so-called refugees. 80 of the civilians are considered refugees by UNRWA, which is outrageous. And so why not, for example, Egypt should demand, if you want this aid, let us at least get rid of the refugee camps, or at least the stigma of refugees. And because, if you're talking about a solution between Israel and the Israeli would like to remove some of these problems. For example, the right of return. It's connected very much to this. And as long as these Palestinians continue to demand a right of return, even in principle, there is little progress in the Israeli negotiations. So what I'm saying, Egypt being it is what it is, it has a great deal of interest, great deal of influence, and I have a very close relationship now with Israel, probably better than any time before.
Well, certainly Egypt, we have seen that the peace treaty has been scrupulously respected by both since time. So there must be something positive there. Right. So it's obvious. Still, we need to work together, the international community, the regional parties, towards a final solution between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We are not going to negotiate on behalf. This is not our role. To enter negotiations freely is fair, and we will encourage both parties, and we will help both parties to reach of agreement.
But do you really think, given the fact that there were no comprehensive solution going back now more than 30 years, at least since the Oslo Accord, and the likelihood of reaching a comprehensive solution given what we see today in Israel, the settlement, the expansion of the settlement, Abbas threatening to go to the United Nations, to the International Criminal Court. If anything, the bilateral relations has gone worse, not better, in the last year or so. And so I'm thinking in terms of to aim for a comprehensive solution may be impossible at this juncture. Why not go about it in stages? Do you agree that perhaps in stages, if we solve one problem at a time, might be helpful, eventually lead to a comprehensive solution?
Well, we've tried both, actually. Throughout the years, we've tried both, and it's very difficult now for some an agreement to put forward an idea that has never been put forward before. Everything has been discussed, and there's always the technical term that has been used in peace negotiations for a long time has been this interlock between temporary measures and final solution, because the parties will not be willing into these temporary agreements without seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. So always, basically, fundamentally, what all peace negotiations between Israelis have been about is to find this relationship between immediate steps that can be taken now and the final solution, and an interlock between the two. In every case, this is what the equation looks like. Now, the point I want to make here is that when we look today, what we see is problems and challenges. If we continue to just see problems and challenges, we won't do it. What we need to do is to look at these problems and challenges and see opportunities and solutions. It's not going to be easy, it's not going to happen overnight, but this change of attitude is very important. And that's why a week ago, there was this Gaza international conference to help and to reconstruct Gaza. And one of the first things almost every single delegation said was, we encourage Secretary Kerry, who was there of course, to continue with your efforts for a final solution. So you do these immediate problems when they arise, but at the same time, you make clear that you're the final solution.
All this fine when, Kerry's tried, President Obama tried early on before Kerry became Secretary of State, 6 years. Efforts were made by President Clinton, President Bush, but none of this really led to anything. And now they're urging Cairo to start again. And what is the basis? Do you really feel that Netanyahu today, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas, have the means, the capacity to, in fact, make the kind of necessary concession, significant concession, on Jerusalem, on borders, national security, all of this? Do means the ability as these two people, or the willingness, in fact, to sit down in earnest and really negotiate? Well, I mean, the United States may have the best of intention, but you cannot, with intentions alone, get these two parties to sit down actually to make that kind of concession. That is, without which there's going to be no peace.
I agree that with intentions alone, you cannot reach any kind of conclusion in anything. But if you have the good intentions and you're willing to make the effort, then you have a chance. And this is basically, when you start in any kind of endeavor, you are never assured of the result. But at least when you have the intention and you're willing to make the effort, there's a possibility you will achieve that result. And this is what we're saying. We are willing to help. We are willing to play our role.
But again, going back to Hamas and try to finalize this aspect of our discussion. Hamas still does not recognize Israel. In fact, openly, clearly, they seek the destruction of Israel, still represent significant part of the Palestinian community. Notwithstanding that the Palestinian Authority may have a role to play now as a result of what happened in these negotiations in Gaza. Hamas have said time and again, we're going to continue the internal apparatus, our own security, we continue to hold on to no matter what anyone said or done. And so this is what you have. And Netanyahu is saying, under no circumstances we will sit down and negotiate in earnest with the Palestinians as long as Hamas is part and parcel of the so-called unity government, which has been dysfunctional to this point still. So all of this, we are seeing this happening time and again. Where is the prospect of making any significant progress at this juncture?
Well, one of the elements that we could use is the fact that the current Palestinian national government is not really a national unity government. It's not a political government. It's a technocratic, which doesn't. So there is an opportunity there that we can use. Again, I agree with you that if we were Palestinians and the Israelis on their own, it would be very difficult for them to take the necessary political decisions. But if we were to help the United States, Egypt, other Arab countries, stand a chance of success.
So no, I want to ask you this question. For me, I've said this, many people have been saying, the problem is when people have been at confrontation long now, instead of preparing the public for the eventuality of peace, they are in fact continue to polarize the public and continue to alienate the public from one another. Let me just give you, came to the United Nations and he delivered, in my view, poisonous speech against Israel. Using the word racist 7 times, using the word Nakba 5 times, using the word apartheid. There wasn't a single word that he did not use in order to characterize Israel as such. And then, of course, you have Netanyahu on the other side. This is our land. We inherited this from our forefathers. We're not occupying power. This is the kind of public narrative you hear time and again. The Israeli public and the Palestinian public are simply not prepared, psychologically speaking, to consider the kind of concession necessary when their leaders, time and again, day in and day out, telling them the other opposite, without having the public agreeing to or anticipating the need for concessions. Neither Netanyahu or Abbas will be in a position to deliver.
Well, you're certainly right, and certainly once you have serious negotiations happening, part of the effort will be to prepare. There's no this is the role of any leader. When you embark on a process, you make sure that your own people are supporting you. And there's this constant interaction between leadership and public opinion. And it's important. It's the only way to move forward. But let's take things one step at a time. Let's give it a try and best we can.
Well, I just want to mention to you, during the negotiation, the auspices of the United States with John Kerry, shuttling back and forth, they both agreed to keep the negotiations. Any progress made, talk about it. But John Kerry never insisted that during this set of negotiations, as they are sitting and negotiating, they continue to attack each other throughout the process. I don't remember a single day that Saib Arkat did not attack Israel, and then you have Bennett or Lieberman attacking the Palestinian Authority. This was happening while the negotiations were in process. How on earth are you going to get the people now to accept any kind of agreement between the two sides when in fact they've been poisoning the public instead of preparing them the kind of concession that's absolutely necessary?
Well, you know better than I that while
I don't.
While leaders are negotiating, at the same time, they're not just negotiating with the other side. They're negotiating with their own side. And sometimes there is a kind of struggle for power within each side. At the same time that the negotiations are happening, it's a fact of life. And we have to deal with it, and we have to be able to overcome it.
But then they're posing, in the meantime, making it really ever harder, almost impossible to bridge the gap as between the two as people. I think of all things that affect the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, probably more than anything else, other than borders, territory, and all of this, there's a solution. Like you said, it's been hashed and rehashed. We know how it should look like, the eventual solution. But that's something that has not been addressed, is that the psychological aspect of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and there's very little, if anything, is done about it. That is that neither people have been able to overcome in so many decades, nearly now 7 decades. Don't you think, I want to mention to you, your President Morsi, one thing he's done absolutely correct, that is, when he realized that the Muslim Brotherhood, Sisi, or President Sisi, when President Morsi basically was busy consolidating his power, President Sisi went to the public and said, you need a change, you have to show me, come out to the street. And nearly 10 million went to the street. So he sought public consensus before he overthrew Sisi. Am I right? Before he threw, Morsi.
Well, there's an issue of sequence. But definitely,
okay.
There was a very clear manifestation of public will,
exactly.
which allowed the army to intervene. When the army intervened in Egypt, there were millions of people in the street, and it was at the behest of the different groups in the country, not just the people in the street, but the political parties, the church, the mosques, this whole coalition that was built. And you're right, you cannot do that without having this very strong support.
But this is exactly what President Sisi has done.
Yes.
Appealed to the public came out in the millions and gave him the mandate before the election. And I think, this is something I don't think the Israelis and the Palestinians have yet to recognize, that they need to prepare the public for what is going to take place and forge some kind of an agreement. Let me just go back to this phenomena. I don't think we can dismiss it, and the so-called Arab Spring. After all, the Arab Spring was affected, starting with Tunisia, went but Egypt probably dealt with it much better than certainly Libya, certainly Syria, just about the same level. Yeah. So where do we go with this? And in my view, the rise of Arab youth, being the technological revolution, the information revolution, are no longer prepared to sit and wait. They want a future, they want jobs, they want opportunity. And this is basically what instigated spring. So it's not going to end in Iraq, it's not going to end in Syria, and it could engulf other states. What it is that you think need to be done to steer this uprising into something more positive, comfortable?
That this you call it an uprising, call it a revolution. What we're seeing is a very profound transformation, and it is powered the fact that the majority of the population, who are the youth, are disenfranchised. So definitely that is something that has to be dealt with. How do you, in a sense, in a race, you have to be able to provide jobs, to provide hope, and at the same time, in order to provide jobs, you need to have. So you are in a race, and we've seen how President Sisi has handled this. He's handled this by taking very severe, very far-reaching economic reforms, but at the same time, opening up projects that will allow people to work. In Egypt today, we have, for the first time in years, in the newspapers, you see ads for carpenters wanted, ads for motor drivers wanted, and so on. So it creates a momentum. And the new project of the new Suez Canal, the project has an enormous moral value. It listen, if you're patient, there is a good future out there. This is basically what's happened, and that's why President Sisi said, we have to finish this new canal in just 1 year. Next August, you have to have ships crossing the new canal. We have to do it very quickly. We have to have hundreds of thousands of workers digging. We want to see that happening. And that's not in itself going to create enough jobs, but it's going to create the hope. And it's going to create the momentum. The next step that is in February, we have an international investment conference in Egypt, in which we will be inviting investors from all over the world. Come here, invest. These are the opportunities we have. We will be preparing detailed projects for public-private projects, for business-to-business partnerships. And we will say, come on, let's work together. There's a profit to be made here. There's an interest here that Egypt succeeds for the rest of the region and the rest of the world.
I think, reading what's taken place in Egypt, that is, I think, very encouraging. There's no question about it. Except there's some criticism, of course, about freedom of press, things. Is there any plans to ease the pressure that is allowing to be freer in that sense, adhering more consistently with the human rights, with the free press? Or is it going to be subdued or pressed still? There's no question. I think economic development is very critical, and that's going to lift the people. We hear this kind of concern by investors actually saying, are we sure that this current situation is sustainable? And this is what investors are saying. And do you feel that the Western countries, other than Arabs, be prepared to come and invest in the billions of dollars necessary? I hope so. I would like to see that happen without any question. But do you see these possibilities as you plan for this conference?
Well, first of all, let's look at the facts. There has been, in the past years, considerable U.S. investments in Egypt. Not one single company left Egypt during the past few years. They have all continued to operate, and they have all all continue to make a profit. So the only thing I could conclude from that is that the investors from the West will increase. Regarding the situation of freedoms in general in Egypt, this has always been a balance. It's a balance here, it's a balance in Egypt, it's always a balance. It's a balance between the need for stability on the one hand, and at the same time, ability to continue. People need to feel that they're free. They need to feel that they own the process. And that's why we have had a very robust political development. We have had a new constitution, a referendum on the constitution. We've had presidential elections, and we are preparing now for parliamentary elections. So people do have avenues of participation, very clear avenues of political participation, and they're encouraged to participate. Regarding, I think we should distinguish between two things, which is completely free. We haven't had any complaints from the Egyptian media. And between media belonging to countries that are considered to be promoting the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, such as Qatar, such as Al Jazeera. We that Al Jazeera is basically the propaganda arm of the government of Qatar. And therefore, so long as the government of Qatar continues to finance extremists, we have reservations regarding Al Jazeera. We have a sovereign right to that. And if Al Jazeera is going to entice journalists to come into Egypt illegally to work, they will have to deal with Egyptian law. Regarding issues of freedom in general, there's this issue, of course, that people talk a lot about, which is protest, the protest law. What does the protest law in Egypt say? It says that if you want to organize a protest, you need to notify the nearest police station 3 days in advance. I think that's pretty fair. I don't see anything that's abnormally terrible about that. The issue of having protests without police protection has shown to be very detrimental to society. People get killed, and the economy really was on the verge of collapse because of all these protests. Because of the number of protests we had over 3 years, the poverty rates in Egypt moved from 25% to 40%. That's about 12 million people became poor. So it's a decision that was collectively taken by the Egyptian people. We have to restrain protests, not to tell people you don't have the right to express yourself, but to do so in an organized way that will not hurt the rest of the country.
One more question unrelated to this, bilateral relations between Egypt and Turkey. I know it's been strained quite a bit. Turkey and Qatar actually fall into the same category. They've been supportive of various Islamic groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood, contrary to the wishes and desire of the Egyptian people. Where do you see that going, this relationship with Turkey at this juncture?
Egypt has never taken a negative position vis-a-vis the Turkish people. However, what we have right now is a Turkish president who is taking very controversial measures at home, political system in his country for his own personal gain, while at the same time criticizing Egypt as a way of pointing people's attention away from what he's actually doing. This is something we object to, but we're not going to allow ourselves to go into rhetoric. we believe that in the long term, both the Egyptian and Turkish people will continue to exist in the region and have an interest in cooperating with each other.
Without Erdogan, though.
The issue is we are not going to be used as a scapegoat for anyone's internal political needs.
You know, Ambassador, I think we could go on for another 2, 3, 4 hours, but I'm going to try to take a few minutes for answers. And so we'll entertain a few questions. Do we have a mic someplace? Okay. So start with ladies first. So why don't you come over here? Thank you. Please limit yourself to a short question. No commentaries at this, because we'd like to entertain as many questions as we possibly can. Please.
Okay. Can people whose political perspective called liberal and secularist publish articles in Egypt that criticize President Sisi?
I can actually point to a few articles in today's papers. So definitely, and they do so, all the time. There's no issue in Egypt regarding people expressing their views. There is an issue in Egypt regarding people taking action to try and stall the economic progress. Because basically, this is what the Muslim Brotherhood are trying to do. They're trying to prevent this government from achieving job creation, from resolving the problems that are facing the people. In order, they think that this will make it easier for them to return to power. Of course, it's not going to happen because people hate them even more. But anyway, so we have no problem whatsoever with people who criticize the president, criticize the government. The papers are full of that.
Okay. There, please. Again, just a question.
There were some reports recently that Egypt had offered part of the Sinai to extend Gaza that President Abbas then rejected. Could you just comment on whether this was a plan? Is this or should be considered?
First of all, reports are completely false, complete nonsense. Second of all, it is not within the authority of any individual, any politician, any political party to give up parts of Egypt's territory. Third of all, if we start talking about these issues, basically what we do is we move away from what we should be doing, which is to try to solve the Palestinian-Israeli problem.
Okay. That gentleman there in the back. Here. This one there.
What is the current state of Egypt's relationship with the Assad government in Syria?
Well, we do not have diplomatic relations with Syria. However, we still have an Egyptian community in Syria, despite all the troubles there. So we do have they're staying at a hotel because it's not safe to stay at the embassy. And they go there, I think, once or twice a week. They're based mostly in Beirut, between Beirut and Damascus. We do have a dialogue with with the Syrian government, but we do not have diplomatic relations with them, obviously because of our disapproval of the way they have handled the whole situation.
Okay. Back there, gentleman there.
Okay, so full disclosure, I do work for Al Jazeera out here in a professional capacity. I'm curious about what you said about the journalists there, because the charges against 3 of my colleagues who have been there since December 29th are that they spoke party belonging to the previous put you in this position. So, first of all, what what would you recommend? How would you recommend a journalist, a foreign journalist in Egypt, go about their jobs if they can only speak to one side? And the other is, do you have any idea if my colleagues might be released anytime soon?
What was the last part?
If her colleagues, the two journalists from Al Jazeera,
Al Jazeera.
will they be released anytime soon?
Okay. The problem with the Al Jazeera journalists, and you can agree or disagree, but I mean factually, charges against them were exactly the same as the charges against another Al Jazeera journalist called Tawfik Aluni. I remember his name because it's the same as mine. And he faced exactly the same charges in Spain. And he got exactly the same sentence in Spain, which is basically, and he said exactly the same defense, which I was just doing my job. Well, President Sisi a few weeks ago said, listen, if I had been in power, but the situation now is that they are basically, they have been sentenced, but they have filed an appeal. And I think the best way, the best course for them is to follow that appeal, and then we'll see how it goes from there. In general, about foreign journalists in Egypt, how do they act? What do they do? The first thing that they need to do is to enter Egypt on a correct visa. They need to say, we are journalists and we do our job in Egypt. That's very important. If they enter Egypt on false pretexts, then by doing that, they're just breaking the law. It's, it's the same here, it's the same anywhere. The other thing they need to do is just go out and speak to people. There are many Muslim Brotherhood supporters in Egypt that they can talk with, and certainly they have many ways of doing their job without breaking the law. Now, whether you agree or disagree with the law, you still have to respect it.
Okay. Let's see.
Very quickly, you spoke about the value of Western.
Louder so we can hear.
You spoke about the value of investment from the West. I'm curious to know the level of investment from China, and is there a significant amount, and how does it compare to the amount invested from the West?
There is a lot of interest from China in investing in Egypt, particularly in the zone surrounding the Suez Canal. For many years, there has been a Chinese project of an industrial zone, a Chinese industrial at the entrance of the Suez Canal. That hasn't been functioning very well, probably because of bureaucratic reasons. But I think now it will start functioning better. But the Chinese are very good in business. They are serious business people, and they're serious competitors. And what I say when I meet business people in the United States, I tell them, listen, we have all these projects. We have the whole zone around the Suez Canal that's going to be built into new ports, new industrial zones, new distribution centers. All this is going to require both foreign investment, but also foreign companies to do the job. So there are opportunities. We're going to probably double the roads we have. We're going to add half of the agriculture, to add an additional 8 million acres agricultural land in Egypt. We're going to add an additional 4 million. We have all these opportunities in terms of energy, in terms of renewable energy, in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of infrastructure. You name it, we're going to have these projects. the earlier you start, the better opportunity you will have.
Do you have, in this respect, do you have any preferential in terms of, do you seek more Western investment versus Chinese or Japanese, or that is not a criteria at all?
We don't have a political criteria, but what we do have is for every project, we have a technical criteria. So if the West can provide better quality, then obviously they have an advantage. But we do not say we're going to take from this country and not from that country.
Yeah. Yes. This gentleman there, please. I'll get back to you.
Given the rights abuses since President Morsi's ousting, do you believe that Egypt will ratify the Rome Statute anytime soon and join the Criminal Court?
Well, I think, first of all, as I was saying, we have a robust political agenda. The next step in our agenda is to elect a parliament. We're not going to ratify anything until we have a sitting parliament. And certainly, we have not taken a position whether or not to do anything until that parliament is in place. We have to wait until they're in place and see what they do. But regarding the first part of your comment, really, which is reported human rights violations in Egypt, we don't see that there are any human rights violations in Egypt. The human rights as a concept is a progressive concept, which means that there's no country in the world that is perfect, that has a perfect human rights. Obviously, you can name the country some human rights. But what I'm saying is that there's no official policy of human rights violations in Egypt. And so we have nothing to fear regarding the Rome statutes or otherwise.
The mic.
Well, actually, we had President Sisi here, and he had a meeting with a number of U.S. businessmen, and one of them was the CEO of Marriott. And he was telling the president that they have many hotels in Egypt, that occupancy of hotels in Egypt today is 3 times as much as it was last year. So obviously there is a very quick increase in tourism in Egypt.
The gentleman here, please.
Given the current capability of the Iraqi army, I understand General Allen, the Supreme Commander of the U.S., has estimated that it would take a year for the Iraqi army to be capable of really making a difference. Is there any scenario, if things just worsened, where the Egyptian military would take a role? I would imagine that would make a huge difference.
Well, the way we look at this terrorist threat, we look at the terrorist threat in a comprehensive way. We have the same terrorist threat that exists in Iraq, it exists in Syria, it exists in Libya, which is our next door neighbor, and it used to exist in the Sinai. Now, pockets of it, we have managed to control most of it, but still we have a threat inside Egypt. So what we're going to do is we're going to confront that definitely as effectively as we can within the resources. Now, the exact operational details are still in the... General Allen was in Egypt last week. Our Chief of Staff was in Washington this week, or last week actually, this is already Monday. And all these issues are being dealt with by the professionals. So we will do whatever we can within the limits of our resources, because we have to confront these kinds of challenges in Libya and in Egypt, and we have to protect our borders to make sure that we don't allow these groups to infiltrate Egypt through Libya.
Does social media have any like galvanizing ideologies on social media have any threat to Egypt, and can like Muslim Brotherhood promote its ideas through social media? And what does Egypt intend to do about this or control the threat?
Well, social media is obviously we saw the effect of social media in 2000 when we had the revolution. And, much of the buzz was created through social media, and I remember the revolution took place in Egypt on the 25th of January. I remember on the 23rd of January having a discussion with my wife. And my wife is an internet person. She lives most of her life online. And I was, which I'm not. And basically I was telling her, this doesn't look like it's something serious. And she said, no, you're completely wrong. This is serious. I can in anything like this, the buzz in the social media. So the social media can be very effective in allowing people to communicate with each other. However, what you tend to see is that people of the same ideology, they tend to communicate together more than across ideological lines. Are the Muslim Brotherhood active in social media? Of course. They have specialized people, very well funded, working full-time on the social media, getting the message across. Now, what can the government do about that? It is wrong to start thinking in terms of preventing groups from getting their message, because they are going to get their message through one way or another. It is much more effective to counter that message by giving people the facts, by telling them the truth. I mean, we're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood has always had parallel organizational structures. It has always had a social structure that deals with schools, that deals with orphanages, that deals with charity. It has always had a political structure that organizes electoral campaigns, and it has always had a secret structure that trains people to use weapons, that trains people to blow things up, and it has always denied responsibility for any terrorist acts. But historically, we know that they are responsible for many terrorist acts. So the more you explain to people, the more you expose them. That's the best way of dealing with them. Not to try and prevent them from getting their message across, because they're going to do so one way or another.
Okay, we'll take lady there, please.
I'm just curious, what was your diplomatic...
Bring the mic closer.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what was your diplomatic posture when Morsi was in power?
This is my third posting as ambassador. When you're posted as an ambassador, you present letters of credentials signed by the president, addressed to the other president, to which you are accredited. My first were signed by Mubarak, and my second credentials were signed by Field Marshal Tantawi, who was the interim leader in Egypt after Mubarak. And my third letters of credentials were signed by Morsi. And now I'm working for, this is actually in this post, currently this is my third president. When I came here first when Morsi was president, and then you have Adli Mansour, who was the interim president, and now it is President Sisi. How does that affect the way I function? Well, first of all, I do not represent a political party. And despite the fact that my letters of credentials are signed by a president, I represent the country as a whole. I represent the country's interests, and basically I have continued to represent the country's interests. And parties may come and go, and presidents may come and go, but the country does not come and go. Egypt has been there unified for 1,000 years, and before that, it was in kingdoms. And Egypt will remain there for the next 5,000 years. And people like me to represent Egypt as a nation.
I also suggest to you how wonderful it is, accept president, received here in Washington. I know this only too well. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time and be with us. Thank you so much.